Todd Gurley had one of the most interesting, fast, and polarizing careers in NFL history. At one point, he was the best running back in the world, but just a few years later, he was out of the league. This is Todd Gurley's NFL story. Despite Gurley playing football since he was 5, he grew up in a mobile home park without cable TV, so the only sports influence he had was the local college basketball at Duke, and that became his first full passion. So, in his freshman year of high school, he quit football for basketball, but only 5 weeks into the football season, because of an assistant coach making fun of him for choosing basketball, he decided to join mid-season. And after a few quiet years, he finally started at running back in 2010, and in his senior season, he had 2,600 yards and 38 touchdowns and became a 4-star recruit. And then after choosing the University of Georgia, he became just the second true freshman in UGA history to reach 1,000 yards. The first was Herschel Walker. And also in just his freshman season, he ended second in the SEC in yards and was all-conference, as Georgia had their best year in a decade, going 12-2, and despite losing in the SEC championship game, they still won a bowl game with Todd Gurley running for a combined 247 yards and 3 touchdowns in those last 2 games, as he ended his first and best year in college with 1,300 yards and 17 touchdowns, as the young Gurley's future looked bright as ever. And he then kept the momentum going into 2013, until, in week 4, he sprained his ankle and the end of his career began. However, he would still play in 2013, but the Bulldogs were just not the same after he missed 3 games, as they finished 8-5 and lost in the Gator Bowl. So, now in his junior season, he locked the in, and it looked like he could even win the Heisman, as through just week 5 he amassed 773 yards and 8 touchdowns. But then, because Gurley just wanted to help his family live a little bit better, he illegally took money for signing merch, and the NCAA cracked down on him as he was suspended 4 games, which obviously is a very complicated situation, mainly because of how much money the NCAA was getting from Gurley and how Gurley just wanted a little bit. But he paid his punishment, and now with any awards out the window, Gurley returned in a massive game against Auburn and showed out, as the Dogs blew out a top 10 team, with Gurley rushing for 138 yards and 1 touchdown. But this would be his last game in the red and gray, as he tore his ACL and was out for the year. But despite all of his troubles during college, Gurley left Georgia as essentially their second greatest back ever, right behind the legendary Herschel Walker. So now heading into the 2015 NFL Draft, Todd was projected to at least go in the first round, but not necessarily high due to the obvious injury concerns, but still there were quite a few teams who could use a running back, and along with the only other major running back in the draft being another all-time great college back in Melvin Gordon, Gurley was finally going to get his bag that he had been waiting for.
With the 10th pick in the 2015 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Rams select Todd Gurley, running back, Georgia.
Okay, well, he certainly wasn't expected or supposed to go that high, as this is a pretty big surprise for St. Louis to take that risk, but it came with a big reward, so I guess let's just finally get into the NFL. But first, we do have to wait a little bit, as the ACL tear from last year was still healing and wouldn't be healed until early in the season. So TG wasn't even going to get much practice and absolutely no contact practice, which to a young running back would usually be a death sentence. But for Todd, it was just motivation, as in his first start in the NFL, he went f***ing nuts. In an important divisional game against the future NFC Championship game losers, he had 146 yards on 7.7 yards per carry, as they beat the Cardinals to get to 2-2. But he wasn't done, as in just his first 4 NFL starts, he had 566 yards, which is a post-merger NFL record. But most importantly, he had a mediocre Rams team sitting at 4-3, with 2 of those losses coming in games that he didn't even play in. But he was the only good part about this offense, because they started both Nick Foles and Case Keenum throughout the year, who combined for just 11 passing touchdowns. And along with that, both of their best receivers, Tavon Austin and Kenny Britt, only combined for 1,100 yards. And just to put that into perspective, Todd Gurley, who had to run behind one of the worst O-lines in the NFL, had 10 touchdowns and 1,100 yards on the ground by himself as a fucking rookie. So it was no surprise that he made a Pro Bowl and was the Rookie of the Year. But in terms of how good the Rams were, the answer was Jeff Fisher, as they ended at 7-9 pretty much entirely because of the stellar D-line and a rookie running back. So after leaving the city of St. Louis after a decade and a half of struggle, the Rams are beginning to build something, as in the 2016 draft, they traded 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and 2 thirds for the #1 overall pick of a franchise quarterback. And after a fairly lousy free agency, the now Los Angeles Rams made the decision of Jared Goff out of Cal over the slightly riskier Carson Wentz. And the 2016 Rams were set with a rookie quarterback, a promising young running back, and an Aaron Donald holding down the declining defense. But as pretty much expected, the Rams were absolutely terrible. Because of Jared Goff needing time to develop, there was never a threat of a passing game, so opponents simply had to stop Todd Gurley to win. And it worked very, very well, as the Rams finished 4-12 and were somehow better than the Bears, Jags, 49ers, and Browns by a whole 3 games? Like, the Rams finished 3rd in the division comfortably, and this was pretty much only because they got extremely lucky and actually started the season 3-1 before returning to their prime 2009 form. And this whole disaster of a season was pretty much because they had absolutely no resemblance of a professional football offense, as along with the aforementioned rookie Jared Goff, Todd Gurley regressed hard and didn't even have 100 yards in a game once, as he ended the year with 885 yards and just 6 tutties. But in a weird twist of fate, this may have been the greatest thing to happen to the Rams since Kurt Warner decided to stop bagging groceries, as they fired mediocrity and hired one of the best young minds in the NFL in Sean McVay. And along with McVay, this Rams offseason seriously needs to be studied for years to come. I mean, in free agency, they signed multiple impactful defensive backs, a solid outside linebacker, 2 starting offensive linemen, including the potential future Hall of Famer in Andrew Whitworth, as well as finally an offensive weapon in Robert Woods. But Mr. Snead was not done, as in the draft without a first-round pick, LA drafted 2 long-term starting receivers in Gerald Everett and Josh Reynolds, and of course, the gem of them all, the future Hall of Fame receiver in Cooper Kupp, who would go on to have one of, if not the greatest single receiving season of all time. So, yeah, it was alright. But now, after an all-time offseason, the Rams were ready to explode onto the scene, and that is exactly what they did. By week 6, the Rams are 4-2, and in this new McVay style of offense, Todd Gurley was thriving with not only 521 rush yards and 4 rushing touchdowns, but also 245 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. But it wasn't only Gurley who was thriving, as the whole team seemed to come together, especially after a 3-game stretch where they never failed to put up less than 33 points a game and outscore their opponents 117-24. So this LA team had finally been thrust into a contender role as they finished the season 11-5 and managed to even get the 3rd seed in the NFC, right ahead of the Drew Brees-led Saints. And towards the end of the season, as the Rams had already clinched the West, they decided to sit Gurley for the final game of the season, so he ended up getting passed in rushing yards by Kareem Hunt. But with all of Gurley's crazy stats from this year, he earned Offensive Player of the Year and was 2nd for MVP, and was the best running back in football in just his 3rd season. And along with becoming the 8th player ever to reach 1,300 yards and 750 receiving yards in the same season, Gurley and the Rams locked down a home playoff game for the very first time since 2003. But as they were such a young team heading to battle against a very, very experienced Falcons team, they just weren't able to get anything but the run game going, as they found themselves in a hole early, and despite Gurley having a fantastic game on not many carries, they simply had to pass the ball for a chance to win, and it just wasn't working. And the Rams lost in the wild card 13-26. But that may have been one of the best case scenarios at the start of the season, as it seemed that after a whole decade and a half of struggle, the Rams finally were contenders again, with many young assets who will keep developing over the years to come. And what do you do with young assets ready to keep developing? You pay them. And that's exactly what the Rams did to Gurley, as they gave the best offensive player in the league the largest contract for a running back ever, with a 4-year, $57.5 million deal. And this specific deal not only had such a large impact on Gurley and his family, but on the entire league and every other running back in it. But that will come soon, as we still have to keep improving this team, and while the offseason wasn't quite as successful as last year, it was still pretty good, as they revamped the defense in free agency, and overall had a pretty decent draft. So now, heading into Gurley's 4th season in the NFL, with as much hype as ever, the Rams exploded as one of the best teams in the NFL as they started 11-1, averaging 35 points per game behind the now elite Jared Goff and Todd Gurley, who is having another incredibly productive season, on well over a touchdown a game as well as 5 yards per carry. But then this story takes a pretty sad turn, as because of the previous leg injuries and the incredible workload that 30's body was taking, he faced multiple minor injury issues late in the season, so after he tweaked his knee in week 15, McVay decided to outright bench him for the last 2 games in preparation for the playoffs. But either way, Gurley still ended the season leading the league in rushing touchdowns and had 1,250 yards on top of his already great receiving numbers, as the Rams finished basically tied with the Saints as the best team in the league with 13 wins and 3 losses. But now going back to Todd, the team did state at the end of the season that his injury issues was simply inflammation in his knee, and that he would be ready to go for the Rams' divisional round game. So, at least on the surface, it seemed like he would be 100% ready for the playoffs. And against the Clown Boys, you would have had no idea that this guy was hurting, as he ran for 115 yards, 1 touchdown, and that was just from 16 carries, as the Rams won their very first playoff game in LA since 1985, which was ironically also against the Cowboys, when the Rams had one of the best college backs ever. That's weird. Anyway, onto the... Oh no, not this game. God damn it. Well, if you somehow don't know, the 2018 Rams played the Saints in the NFC Championship game, and because this was a Todd Gurley video, I will simply ignore anything else that happened in this game. You're welcome, Saints fans. Anyway, Todd Gurley was complete dog shit in this game. Like, probably for the first time in his career, he was this bad, as he only had 10 yards on 4 carries, and despite somehow getting to the end zone, he still played most of this game. Now, granted, it was at his lowest snap count of the season, but he was still out there for 32 times and did fucking nothing. But either way, the Rams still won. No! I was not going to bring it up. I just can't stop my editing self. I'm really sorry. It's just ignore me. Anyway. But there was still this strange narrative on how the Rams literally said that he wasn't hurting, which he clearly was, and how his backup CJ Anderson played way more than him. But Gurley stayed humble, admitted that CJ was currently playing better than him, and it seemed that he was at least going to have a bigger role in the big dance. So, now on to the Super Bowl, and this game was obviously just dog shit all the way through, as Thomas literally put up not a single touchdown for 1 pick and a terrible pass rating, and he fucking won. Come on, bro. Just whatever. Anyway, Gurley was dog shit again because of his apparently not an injury issue. So, I guess, sad Super Bowl loss. Just let's move on to next season. And, shit. Well, Todd was just diagnosed with arthritis in his previously injured knee. So, yeah. Oh, wait, what? Sorry, hold on. We just learned after a full NFL season where Todd looked incredible through pretty much all of it, but it turns out that literally in week 1 he got hurt and it progressively got worse? Jesus, and arthritis can't exactly get better, so this is looking bad. And especially now that contract is looking pretty bad, but he was still the best running back in the NFL, so who really knows? But the only thing that is absolutely certain is that Gurley simply can't be the workhorse back that he always has, and will be forced to take a lesser role to still be effective. And that's exactly what the Rams were thinking in the draft, as they drafted a running back to potentially replace Gurley. Still, the Rams are clear Super Bowl contenders, with once again a great young quarterback, the best running back in football, and one of the greatest, if not the greatest, defensive linemen of all time. So the plan for 2019 was just to run it back. But at this point, it really was not the same, as despite Gurley still being a scoring threat, putting up 14 total touchdowns, he didn't even have 100 yards in a single game again, and ended the year with just 857 yards, as the Rams fell back down to mediocrity at 9-7, just missing the playoffs a year removed from a tight Super Bowl loss. But Gurley still had some vintage games where he nearly broke 100 yards, but simply didn't get enough touches, as even McVay himself said that he should have used Gurley more, and that it may have been the reason for the Rams missing the playoffs. But honestly, I think that he did what was the best option, as Gurley's yards per carry fell off a cliff, and there was a good chance that he could have gotten hurt even worse now with arthritis. But now, along with the worsening medical condition, the Rams were stuck with a terrible contract for, at best now, mediocre running back. So, they made the only realistical, logical choice, and they released Todd Gurley, freeing up just enough money to start a quick rebuild that would end a couple of years later with a Lombardi. But back to Gurley now sitting in free agency in 2020, he seemed like a low-risk, high-reward type of player for many teams, and the Falcons jumped at that opportunity, signing Todd to a 1-year prove-it deal for the 2020 NFL season. And so now in a new city, on a struggling team, in the final years of Matt Ryan, Gurley and the Falcons struggled big time, as they started 0-5 before Gurley actually started having some decent games, such as in Week 5 where he had 121 yards on a wild 8.6 yards per carry, and a touchdown, but it wasn't a loss. And then Gurley really just struggled for the rest of the year, as despite the Falcons having a midseason resurgence, at one point finding themselves at 4-7 before losing out, and ending 4-12, Gurley ended with just 678 yards and still 9 touchdowns. Like, this guy all the way through his career knew how to get into the end zone. Like, he literally lost the Falcons a game because he scored a touchdown, and I'm not even lying. But anyway, after his last Falcons year, he wasn't re-signed, and a few months after the Rams won a Super Bowl without him in 2022, he officially retired from the NFL at just 28 years old. And Todd Gurley's story would become a famous example of a running back's prime being so short that teams shouldn't even keep them by the time they reach their late 20s. And his 2018 contract would become a major reason for all of the chaos of unfair running back treatment in 2023 and 2024, which somehow inadvertently led to one of the greatest rushing seasons of all time, partially caused by a minor knee injury Gurley sustained all the way back in 2014 that would eventually become a devastating and career-ending arthritis injury. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. See ya.